I'm Sleep Aid, your local sleep paralysis demon, and today we are reviewing String Theory by Lazy.Mochi. It is a fantasy action webtoon. And if you would like to submit your webtoon for review, you can find a link to the Reddit post on the Canvas subreddit in the description of the video. Now then, let's take a look at String Theory. I'll read the description and then we will discuss. It says, in a world of unimaginable power, where men with the power to crush gods roam freely, waging wars, where death is but a display of power, and civilians, for some, collateral. 4 teens, 1 omnipresent coward, an outcast, a cinnamon roll, and an orphan are thrust into the world of gods, where the only way of survival is either being allied with the strongest or being the strongest. New episode every Friday. So, String Theory is probably best described as a shonen-style comic, and having read all 25 episodes of it, I would say it's got a lot of fun shonen action in it. There are witty characters in it. There's pretty good humor. It's relatively fun to read, and the way the characters interact with each other and joke and play off of each other and whatnot. There are a few issues that I take with it, having read through it. There's a little bit of difficulty with the logic in the plot and how the story is made to happen. And it feels, especially in the earlier episodes, that there is a little bit too much dialogue. It takes a little bit too long to get moving because you're constantly having to read so much text. And otherwise, I feel that with a lot of the scenes that were shown, we don't really get good layouts of the scenes, and it feels like some of the moments can drag on for a little bit too long. But let's dive into it, and I'll kind of show you what I mean. So, I did actually enjoy reading this comic. Like I said, I think it has a lot of good fun stuff in it, and anybody that likes shonen-style comics will probably enjoy this. It is very, very inspired by major shonen shows. I think there's a lot of Demon Slayer in it, and probably a few others. But to talk about the presentation, I think the presentation is probably where this comic needs the most work. It seems like it's written by someone who has a really good idea and understanding of what shonen is as a category, which is, centered around characters fighting each other. It's an action series, obviously. There's an interesting power scaling system and an interesting approach to magic powers and how the characters utilize them and how they're ranked against each other. And it seems very, very well thought out in that regard. But there is a lot of difficulty with presentation, and so it feels like a series that has a lot of good ideas and has some fun moments, but doesn't do a great job of presenting them to the audience. And so, as you can see, scrolling the first episode here, there is a lot of text. And some of the dialogue just kind of feels like it goes on, and a lot of the conversations feel a little bit too long, a little bit longer than they need to be. Immediately as well, you'll notice that most of the comic is in black and white. There are colors in it. Mostly it is the power effects that are colored in, and so the characters and the backgrounds are black and white, but all the magic powers are done in different colors, and so there is some contrast there. It's not fully black and white. And so it does have some interesting visuals at times, but yeah, the thing that stands out the most to me, especially in these early episodes, is just the presentation. This is something that I point out a lot with various webtoons, but this one is done in a more traditional comic style. It's laid out more like a traditional comic would be, and so you have a fully constructed page here, but as you can see, this highlighted section, that is a single image, and so if you were reading this on a mobile device, this is what would be on screen at one time. And it's very important to consider that, because a majority of the Webtoon audience does read on mobile. And so you need to make sure when you're formatting a comic that it's easy to read on a small screen. Now, the text in this comic does get bigger in the later episodes, but the first few episodes, the text is way too small. You can't really read this on a phone without zooming in a lot. And so I think that it would be a good idea to probably go back and reformat some of these. But it does get better in the later chapters, so that is something that is addressed later on. And again, having this many panels on screen on a small device makes it really hard to follow because the panels end up looking really, really small. And so you either have to zoom in a lot or you just can't really tell what you're looking at. And a lot of people won't read it if they have to go through all that trouble to constantly zoom around and move the screen. And so I would highly recommend, if you draw pages in a more traditional format, I would highly recommend splitting the panels and stacking them vertically for Webtoon, because the Webtoon platform is fully designed around vertical scroll, and it's catered toward a mobile audience. So always keep in mind what your pages are going to look like on a cell phone screen. It's very important to preview them on a cell phone sized screen to make sure that everything is easy to read. And again, the text does get bigger in this comic, so this is something that's already been addressed, but I do recommend keeping all of the text the same size. So this first balloon here where it says "Follow me," that's a good size for the text. That's easy to read, it stands out, you could see it on mobile, but some of these other balloons with their in the smaller panels, we have smaller text, and as you can see, it's a lot harder to read. They should be at a minimum the same size as this one here where it says "Follow me," and I generally recommend keeping most of the text in a comic all the same size. I don't think it's a good idea to have different size text with speech balloons unless you're adding like a little aside or a joke or something being said under the character's breath. Usually you want to keep it a standard size. It makes it a lot easier to read. But yes, layout concerns aside, let's talk about the story a little bit. So the story of this comic is our main character signs up for high school on his own in hopes of impressing his mom. And without reading the terms and conditions, he accidentally signs up for a high school for magic power users called Resonance. But he doesn't have Resonance, he's just an ordinary kid. And so when he shows up, they don't understand why he's there, and they say that, well, since now he knows about the secret Resonant organization, he has to be executed. But when taken before the council, they decide that they will give him 1 year in which to awaken his resonant powers, or they'll execute him after that. And so, on his first day, he is assigned to a class with 3 other students in it, and they are sent out on a mission right away. Their mission is to stop an illegal arms deal that is being made with someone called the Dark Shogun, I think that's what his name was, who is leading an evil force to try and destroy all of the resonance. And so they immediately set out on this mission, but they're sent to Osaka to find the arms deal, and that's the only information they're given, is just that it's happening there and they need to stop it, as 4 kids who have never been on a mission before, and one of them doesn't even have any powers. And so one character, was it Minami, or I think her name started with a K, connects to the dark web and tries to make an illegal arms purchase so that she can learn the location of the arms dealers, and they find them at a weapons factory in the middle of a forest in the middle of Osaka, and so they simply attack the factory to try and stop the sale. And one character uses her powers to summon a magic cheetah that kills all of the guards, but then she feels bad about it, and then more guards show up, and then our characters get restrained, at which point the leader of the gang shows up, and the 4 heroes pretend to be generals of the Dark Army, the ones that are supposed to be buying the weapons, at which point the gang leader decides to test them by challenging them to a fight, which will prove if they're powerful enough to actually be generals of the Dark Shogun. They fight against him for a while, but he's too strong, and then the actual general shows up and kills the gang leader, and then they fight him for 15 episodes, and the fight is still not over at this point. And so the story, I think, starts out very quickly paced. By the first 10 episodes, things are moving really quickly, and almost a little too quickly. Even though there's so much dialogue, there's a lot of information that we don't really have, and you're kind of left to wonder, why would these kids be sent on this mission where they're almost certainly going to die, or why are they being sent on a mission with no information in the first place to where they couldn't possibly complete it? And why would they accept a kid with no powers into a school for kids with powers and send him on a mission where he's going to fight against people with powers? And, you know, it's one of those things where I think that this is something that started out as a series of actually decent ideas, and it just falls flat on the execution. And so essentially what we have is a story where our main character starts out as a powerless teenager who accidentally gets tangled up in a magical school that's fighting a intergalactic war against other magic users, and he kind of gets wrapped up in this conflict that's a lot bigger than himself, and somehow finds himself right in the middle of it. But in the course of it, he awakens his own power and ends up being instrumental in the fight. That's generally where the plot is going, but it's just executed in a very silly way. So, you know, why does the top secret magical school have a public application form on the internet that anybody can just find and sign up for? How is a high school age student able to sign up for a school on his own anyway? Wouldn't he need guardianship for that? There'd be government process. I mean, you know, there are a lot of little things with the logic that just don't really add up. Most of those things, though, honestly aren't important, because the goal of the story is to get our characters into these situations so that they can have cool anime fights. And for the most part, that happens pretty quickly. And something I always favor in an action series is that the action happens very quickly. And so in this one, it mostly does. And there are some interesting moments with the action. There are some fun hero moments with the fights. But I think that a big problem that some of the fight scenes have is if you see the episode scrolling in the background, I just remembered, actually, I haven't been liking these. I need to go back and put likes on all the episodes. Sorry, I'll do that as we go. I'll go back and get all of them, but something you'll notice is that a majority of the panels don't have any backgrounds. There's just kind of smoke in the background, and there is a lack of establishing shots. And in a fight, in a action-oriented series, it's very important to have those establishing shots, because we've got multiple characters fighting against each other, but we don't actually know where any of them are standing in relation to each other. And so we don't really have a good lay of the land. We don't really know what we're looking at. Everything is done through close-ups. And so we see some of these cool action poses, these hero moments, and these clashes, but we don't really know what the overall landscape looks like and where everybody's actually standing. It makes it a lot harder to follow the action, because it feels like we're zoomed in too much, and there are some characters that will be in different places, and we can't really tell which scene is happening where, because even though we know they're all in the same general area, they're at this weapons factory, we don't know where any of them are in relation to each other, and it makes it kind of confusing. So like I said, I think that's probably the easiest way to describe it, is what I said before, that I think that the creator of this has a lot of understanding of the shonen genre, probably watches a lot of action shows or reads a lot of action comics, but doesn't have a full understanding of how to execute on all of those ideas yet. And it does get better as it goes on. This comic has been running for about a year. And it's got about 25 episodes, so it's coming out at a decent pace, and it does improve over time. But it really is missing a few core staples, and I think that the pacing slows down a little too much once they start fighting against the lightning user guy, because, as I said, this fight goes on for 15 episodes, and at this point it's still not over. And so the first 10 episodes, things are accelerating very quickly. Our characters introduced to the world, to the school, to the other characters. They, show off demonstrations of how the powers work. They slaughter a bunch of guardsmen, and then they're fighting against a gang leader. All of that happens in 10 episodes, and so things are constantly shifting. New things are constantly happening, but then 15 episodes in a row of just fighting the same character. It goes on a little bit too long. It's too early in the story for a fight to last this long. And so it starts to drag, it starts to feel like nothing's really happening, like progress isn't really being made, and then we have a lot of cuts to flashbacks to introduce character backstory. We learn about the main character and his original mom and his stepmom and kind of what his motivation is, and that's a bit of another issue that I have with this comic, is that we don't really get our character's motivation until we're about halfway through, till we're about 14 episodes in, and up until that point he's just kind of going along with everything because he's signed up for the magic school on accident. He's just been thrust into all of this on accident, and he doesn't really have any major motivation. It's just happenstance that he's been involved in all of this, and we don't even know at the beginning of the comic if he has any powers or if he'll ever have any powers, and so we don't really know why we should be rooting for him. And with an action series of this type, it's very important to establish your main character right away and let us know as an audience why we should be cheering him on, why we want to see him succeed. And so we kind of learn as we go that he's very driven, he has a really strong willpower, and that's what makes him the hero. But we don't really see that early enough. It takes a little too long to reveal all of that, and so in the first 10 or 15 episodes, readers don't really know why they should be engaged with the main character, why they should invest in him, because we just don't know enough about him, since he gets dragged into everything, again, entirely on accident. And as I said, a lot of this does slowly improve. Information slowly gets doled out. Formatting the text, it tends to get better over time, but there are still a few things that could be improved on. Another thing that I kind of pointed out already, but some of the panels are a little bit hard to follow. It doesn't always flow that well, and it can be difficult to tell what order you're supposed to read the dialogue balloons in, especially when we have all these triangular panels and things like that. And so it's really important, again, with an action series especially, which is such a visual genre action. You want to really have impact in the scenes and the combat and all of the clashes, but we need to be able to follow it. So a better layout for the scenes, I think, would improve this a lot. Having better spacing on the panels would improve this a lot, but some of these shots are going to need backgrounds. We're going to need a better idea of what order things are happening in, and probably a little bit less dialogue, because there are a lot of moments where the dialogue kind of repeats a few times and it takes a little bit too long to get to the point. So I think trimming some of the dialogue down a bit would also help speed up the pacing and make it feel like things are happening faster, because we do spend a lot of time talking about things that could be summed up a lot quicker. Give that one a like. So overall, that is probably all I've really got to say on it. I thought that it was a fun read. I like the way that the characters work off of each other, the way that the character dynamics are with the main cast. I think they have a lot of funny banter, and it's fun to see them kind of hanging out and chatting with each other and, mocking each other and whatnot and arguing. But I do think that the pacing is a little bit messy. It starts out at a decent pace. It almost paces a little too quickly in the beginning because, again, we're thrust into this situation that doesn't really get explained right away, and it's kind of hard to understand why things are playing out the way they are and why any of this is even happening. And then after, the 10th episode, the pace slows down a little bit too much, and we're just dwelling on this fight that isn't really that interesting. I think that the villain that we're fighting here for these 15 episodes, he's kind of one note, and we don't really care that much about him as a character. He's just an obstacle to overcome, and so it feels like it probably should have been wrapped up a little bit quicker. It's also worth pointing out that the villain is, again, he is a very one-note character. His entire personality is that he's misogynistic. He thinks that women are lesser than, and so almost all of his dialogue is just talking about how misogynistic he is and how much he doesn't think that women are stronger than him and they can't beat him and whatnot. And again, he feels like a very villain of the week type character, someone that would just be involved in a quick conflict and defeated very quickly and then forgotten very quickly, but instead it just drags on and on and on and on, and so we just have these repeated conversations about how he doesn't like women, and women obviously don't like him for very, very apparent reasons, and they just kind of go back and forth with that. And then we see a lot of interesting power clashes. I think that some of the abilities that the characters have and the way the powers are explained are actually very interesting and cool, and that's the stuff that really works the best in this comic. But it does feel like some of the framing around the fights, why the fights are happening and how long the fights go on, that's the stuff where I think it could improve a lot. So there is a lot of potential in this. Also, obviously the art is a little bit simplistic. Again, it's not even in full color, and the art style is very, very bare bones. We have a lot of panels like this where there's some questionable anatomy, and the faces have a tendency to change a little bit. The characters are not consistently on model, and so I think that the art does its job in the sense that I can always tell what's going on in each panel. But it would be good for an action series to study anatomy and really get good at dynamic posing, and also just the volume and weight that the characters hold, so that when you're drawing things from different angles, it still holds consistency, so it still looks good. But as I've said countless times by now, I do think that the person making this series has a good idea of a good understanding of what the genre is, what the expectations of the genre are, and kind of how to make those big moments happen and those interesting, engaging fight scenes. I think that there's just a lot of structural improvements that need to be made. Things like, again, the layout, the dialogue, the balloons, and just the fundamentals of the art itself, adding backgrounds, improving the anatomy, improving the posing. But it's interesting. I'm trying to think of a way to kind of summarize my thoughts on it, but I guess that's the easiest way to sum it up, essentially, is that I think that some of the fundamentals are lacking. So this is a comic that knows what it wants to be, that understands its genre, but isn't being executed to the fullest potential. And so I think that continuing to improve on those structural things could make this potentially a very, very good comic. But one thing I will applaud is the consistency of it, because again, over a year, posting 25 episodes, and especially longer episodes, they are fairly long, that's very commendable. that shows that there is kind of a will to keep this thing going, and there is an ability to, keep up with that kind of pace. And for a series like this, that's important because this seems like something that could go on for a very long time, especially if it's spending, more than 10 episodes on a single fight. And so I do think it has a lot of potential, and I'd be very curious to see where it's at a year from now, because even if you compare the first episode to the most recent episode, you can see pretty significant improvements, and especially with a series like this, where it's all combat, it's all fighting, and it's all very dramatic, the best way to improve at making something like this is just to do it a lot and keep making more of it. And so as this continues forward, I imagine it will continue to get better. And again, the underlying ideas are good. So I think that's just about everything. I think I covered all of my notes. And yeah, that is String Theory. That is String Theory by Lazy.Mochi. If you are interested in shonen action with really over-the-top and flashy powers and dramatic character backstories and things of that nature, then I would recommend checking it out. It might be the comic for you. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I will see you in your nightmares.